When I stepped into the executive boardroom on the 78th floor of the Willis Tower, Daniel's expression transformed from smug self-assurance to stunned disbelief in mere seconds. 4 years ago, he had abandoned our 5-year relationship and our marketing agency for his ambitious assistant, claiming I lacked the killer instinct necessary in today's digital landscape. Today, as the new CEO of Nexus Innovation Group, the company he'd desperately tried to join for a decade, I was about to announce a complete departmental restructuring that would place him directly under my supervision. The woman now handing me the reorganization documents with a knowing smile was Grace Wilson, who had been laid off during Daniel's hasty company downsizing right after he pushed me out. Before I dive deeper into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this story of professional redemption resonates with you, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow I'm sharing my top 5 strategies for rebuilding your career after a devastating setback. The exact blueprint that took me from rock bottom to running the company my ex could only dream of leading. The executive boardroom of Nexus Innovation Group gleamed under soft, recessed lighting, the polished obsidian conference table reflecting the tense faces of 14 department heads. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Chicago's magnificent skyline, Lake Michigan shimmering in the distance like a blue promise of possibilities. I smoothed my tailored navy Armani suit, selected specifically for this moment, and felt the satisfying weight of the leather portfolio in my hands. Inside were the restructuring documents that would reshape the company's future, and incidentally, Daniel Carter's inflated sense of importance. Ms. Rebecca Mitchell, CEO of Nexus Innovation Group following the Horizon Ventures acquisition, announced Grace Wilson, her voice clear and professional, despite the momentous nature of this meeting. The room fell silent. Most had expected yet another corporate restructuring announcement. Not the return of a woman many recognized from industry events, but few understood was now their boss. I could feel the collective shift in energy as I moved toward the head of the table, the position Daniel had coveted for years during his desperate attempts to be hired by Nexus. Daniel sat halfway down the table, his Mont Blanc pen frozen mid-twirl between his fingers. His expression morphed from mild curiosity to stunned recognition, then to barely concealed panic. Beside him, Olivia Taylor, once his executive assistant, now his fiancée with a marketing director title she hadn't earned, looked between us. In confusion, her perfectly manicured fingers nervously adjusting the large diamond ring that seemed to catch the light with deliberate prominence. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," I began, my voice steady and confident, a voice I had practiced for months in anticipation of this exact moment. As of 9 a.m. this morning, the acquisition of Nexus Innovation Group by Horizon Ventures has been completed, and the board has unanimously approved our integration strategy. The tension in the room was palpable. These executives had been expecting standard post-acquisition platitudes, promises of minimal disruption, the usual corporate reassurances. What they didn't know was that Horizon Ventures was my company, built from nothing in the 4 years since Daniel had systematically pushed me out of Spectrum Digital, the marketing agency we had co-founded. "Some of you may know me from the industry circuit," I continued, allowing my gaze to sweep across the room before settling briefly on Daniel. "For those who don't, I founded Horizon Ventures 4 years ago after leaving Spectrum Digital Marketing, which Mr. Carter now runs." Daniel's knuckles whitened around his pen as our shared history hung in the air between us. The memory of his words echoed in my mind. "You're too soft for this business, Becca. This industry rewards aggression and risk-taking, not your cautious relationship-building approach." I opened my portfolio with practiced calm, the familiar action keeping me grounded in the present rather than the painful past. Nexus has been a leader in digital marketing integration for years, but recent quarterly reports show concerning trends. Client retention dropping by 27% annually, decreasing market share in key segments, and employee satisfaction at a concerning low. Several executives shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between me and their notebooks. This wasn't news to them, but having it stated so directly by their new CEO clearly made them uneasy. Daniel and I had met at Northwestern University, both ambitious marketing students with complementary skills. Where I excelled at strategy and client relationships, Daniel shone in pitching and short-term campaign execution. Our romantic relationship had developed alongside our professional one, and after graduation, we'd worked at competing agencies for 3 years before taking the leap to found Spectrum Digital together. For 5 years, we'd built a respectable, boutique agency with a growing client list and strong industry reputation, until Daniel decided both our business approach and our relationship were holding him back. "Immediate restructuring is necessary," I said, nodding to Grace, who began distributing sealed folders to everyone at the table. These packets outline our comprehensive integration plan, including departmental realignments effective next week. The room erupted in whispers as executives reached for the folders with varying degrees of apprehension. Some would find their positions strengthened or unchanged. Others would discover significant changes to their authority or reporting structure. Daniel didn't move to touch his folder, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of shock and growing anger. Olivia reached for hers with visible trepidation, the diamond on her finger, similar in style though notably larger than the one Daniel had given me for our engagement, catching the light as her hand trembled slightly. "The restructuring addresses several fundamental problems," I continued, my voice carrying easily over the murmurs. "Nexus has drifted from data-driven decision-making to intuition-based campaign development. The results speak for themselves. Declining effectiveness metrics across 78% of client accounts and loss of 3 major accounts in the past quarter alone." This was exactly the approach Daniel had pushed at Spectrum. Flashy campaigns that won awards but delivered mediocre results. The same approach I had questioned before he orchestrated my removal. "This is absurd." Daniel finally spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You can't just walk in here and dismantle established departments without—" "The board unanimously approved the restructuring plan yesterday afternoon," I interrupted smoothly, my voice remaining calm and professional. "Your performance reviews and campaign effectiveness data over the past 2 years provided all the evidence needed for these changes. 4 years ago, I couldn't have imagined being in this position, standing confidently before a room of executives, directly countering Daniel's objections with irrefutable facts. The night Daniel told me he was leaving both our relationship and pushing me out of our company remained painfully vivid. I had collapsed in our Lincoln Park condo, the one I would soon have to leave because his name was on the mortgage, sobbing as he methodically explained how Olivia better understood his vision for the company. "You've always been too emotionally invested in clients, Becca," he had said, not even looking at me as he packed the framed industry awards that bore both our names. "Olivia understands that this business is about perception and bold moves, not your endless relationship nurturing. You're holding the company back. Those affected by significant position changes will meet individually with HR tomorrow," I continued, gesturing toward the door where 2 members of my transition team now stood. "Severance details are outlined in your packets for those positions being eliminated, contingent upon standard non-disclosure agreements." Daniel pushed back his chair abruptly, standing to his full height. "This is personal, not business," he hissed, loud enough for nearby executives to hear. "You've orchestrated this acquisition for revenge." I met his gaze steadily, feeling nothing but a cool detachment where pain had once lived. "On the contrary, Daniel, the acquisition decision was made by Nexus's board after reviewing 3 potential buyers. They selected Horizon Ventures based on our superior integration plan and financial offer. All public information you're welcome to verify." I allowed myself a small smile before adding, "Though I won't deny that the opportunity to correct certain operational inefficiencies brings additional professional satisfaction." Olivia had finally opened her folder, her face draining of color as she read its contents. Unlike Daniel, She wasn't being let go, a deliberate choice on my part. Her technical skills in data analytics had never been the issue. Her ethics and judgment in personal relationships, however, remained questionable. Ms. Taylor will be reassigned to our Austin office effective next Monday, I announced, watching as she processed this information. The Austin office was viable but needed significant rebuilding and was conveniently 200 miles from Chicago headquarters. The memory of discovering their affair resurfaced briefly, walking into Daniel's office after hours to surprise him with dinner, only to find him with Olivia on the desk I had helped select when we founded Spectrum. The humiliation had been excruciating, compounded the next day when he called an emergency board meeting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, where he outlined my inability to evolve with changing market demands as justification for buying out my stake in our company. "You're brilliant with clients, Becca," he had said with practiced sympathy as I was escorted out of our office. "But this industry requires a certain ruthlessness you've never had." That night had shattered my world. I lost my company, my relationship, and my home in one devastating blow. I had to move into a tiny studio apartment and watch from social media as Daniel and Olivia rebranded the agency I had helped build, systematically removing all traces of my contribution. What Daniel hadn't accounted for was Dr. Eleanor Hayes, my former business professor who witnessed my devastation and offered both emotional support and strategic guidance. "Everything he's doing is tactical, Rebecca," she had said during one of our coffee meetings. "He's playing checkers, thinking only of immediate gains. You need to start playing chess." With Eleanor's mentorship and eventual investment, I had channeled my pain into founding Horizon Ventures, a data-driven marketing firm that focused on exactly what Daniel thought didn't matter: measurable results and genuine client relationships. "The marketing division will undergo the most significant changes," I continued, referring to the presentation now displayed on the room's large screen. "We'll be shifting from the current siloed approach to cross-functional teams organized around client industries rather than marketing functions. Our data shows this model improves campaign effectiveness by 43% while reducing internal bottlenecks." This was exactly the model I had advocated for at Spectrum, the one Daniel had dismissed as unnecessarily complicated, before replacing it with a hierarchy that positioned him at the center of all decision-making. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, familiar with both companies' histories. "Daniel," I said, turning directly to him, "your position as VP of Creative Services is being eliminated effective immediately. Your team's performance metrics have consistently ranked lowest in client retention and campaign ROI, despite having the highest operational budget." The data was irrefutable, displayed in clean graphics on the screen behind me. The steady decline of his department's effectiveness charted in bright red lines that resembled a failing electrocardiogram. As security approached, standard protocol, for immediate executive separations, Daniel's face fluctuated between rage and disbelief. "You won't get away with this," he said, voice lowered but intensity unmistakable. "I have relationships throughout this industry. I'll make sure everyone knows this was personal." I leaned closer, my voice for his ears only. "The difference between us, Daniel, is that I have data to support my decisions, while you have only threats and ego. Every change I'm implementing is justified by performance metrics and approved by the board. Your dismissal isn't personal, it's mathematical." The look of confusion in his eyes was almost worth the 4 years of rebuilding my life from the ground up. He truly couldn't comprehend that his failure was quantifiable, not merely my opinion. "Meeting dismissed," I announced to the room. "We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss implementation details. Those continuing with Nexus should consider this an opportunity to realign with truly innovative marketing approaches rather than outdated ego-driven tactics." As Daniel was escorted toward the door, his normally confident stride noticeably stiff. He paused as he passed me. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "But you can't run a company like Nexus. You don't have what it takes." I met his gaze, with perfect composure. "I'm not going to run your version of Nexus, Daniel. I'm going to transform it into something that actually delivers what it promises." His face registered genuine surprise, perhaps at my confidence, perhaps at realizing how completely he had underestimated me. As the door closed behind him, I took the seat at the head of the table, not just claiming physical space, but symbolically establishing my leadership. The remaining executives watched with expressions ranging from wariness to cautious optimism. Jason Kim, Nexus's chief technology officer, whom I'd known from industry conferences, gave me a subtle nod of approval. "I understand today's changes are significant," I acknowledged, "but they're based on extensive analysis and designed to strengthen Nexus's market position. My door is open to those with questions or insights after you've reviewed the complete integration plan." The journey that had led me from sobbing in an empty condo to commanding this boardroom had been anything but easy. After Daniel pushed me out of Spectrum, I'd found myself starting over at 32, with a broken heart and a shattered professional reputation. Eleanor had connected me with initial clients while I developed the data-driven approach that would become Horizon's signature methodology. Jason had provided quiet intelligence about industry shifts, and Grace, who Daniel had callously laid off during one of his efficiency restructurings, had joined as my executive assistant, bringing valuable institutional knowledge and uncompromising loyalty. For 4 years, I had systematically built Horizon Ventures, focusing on measurable results rather than industry awards. While Daniel was giving keynote speeches at marketing conferences, I was developing proprietary analytics tools that delivered unprecedented ROI for our clients. While he was dating Olivia and posting their extravagant vacations on Instagram, I was securing rounds of venture funding and strategically acquiring smaller agencies with complementary capabilities. When Nexus began struggling 6 months ago, the inevitable result of prioritizing flash over substance, I had recognized the opportunity and quietly approached board members with acquisition proposals. What Daniel didn't yet know as he cleaned out his office was that his most prized client relationships had already indicated they would stay with Nexus specifically because of my leadership reputation. "Tomorrow marks the beginning of a new chapter for Nexus," I told the remaining executives. "One built on substance rather than appearance, on client outcomes rather than industry accolades." As I closed my portfolio, I felt a profound sense of completion. This wasn't about revenge, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction. This was about creating something authentic and valuable from the ashes of betrayal. Daniel's parting words no longer held any power over me. The woman he had dismissed as too soft had built a company impressive enough to acquire his dream employer. The approach he had rejected as unnecessarily relationship-focused had created client loyalty strong enough to weather major organizational changes. In trying to diminish me, he had inadvertently set me on a path to greater success than we could have achieved together. Outside the boardroom, Chicago's skyline stretched across the horizon, the afternoon sun reflecting off glass and steel in a landscape of possibilities. I had 4 years of hurt and rebuilding behind me, but as I stood looking out at the city, where I had both lost and found myself, I felt only forward momentum. Daniel and Olivia's presence in the company, his now ended, hers relegated to a distant office, was merely an epilogue to a story that had stopped being about them long ago. If you found inspiration in my journey from devastation to leadership, make sure to subscribe to see tomorrow's video where I'll break down the 5 key strategies that helped me rebuild my career after betrayal. Drop a comment letting me know which part of this story resonated with you the most, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that professional setbacks, even devastating ones, don't determine your ultimate success. The best. Comeback stories are still being written. Maybe yours is next. The Mitchell-Carter residence sat perched on the 20th floor of a luxury high-rise in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline and Lake Michigan beyond. The condo had been featured in Chicago Home and Design just 8 months earlier. Marketing power couple creates urban oasis, a glossy 10-page spread showcasing the custom features Rebecca and Daniel had meticulously selected together. The night that Daniel ended their 5-year relationship, rain pelted against the windows. The Chicago skyline blurred behind sheets of water as if the weather had conspired to match Rebecca's internal landscape. Turbulent, obscured, drowning. "I don't understand," Rebecca repeated, watching Daniel methodically pack his essentials into a leather weekender bag. Ironically, a gift she had given him for their 4th anniversary. "We were just discussing the Thompson Hotels campaign yesterday. We were planning the industry conference in Barcelona next month." The living room that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed cavernous and cold. The minimalist furniture that had appeared sophisticated in daylight now feeling sterile under the recessed lighting. Daniel sighed, the sound heavy with practiced patience. He finally turned to face her, his expression a careful mask of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This isn't about any single disagreement, Becca. It's about fundamental incompatibility, both personally and professionally." He zipped the weekender bag with a definitive click. "I need a partner who understands what it takes to succeed at this level. Someone who can make the tough calls without getting emotional about client relationships." The carefully controlled words landed like precise incisions. This wasn't an impulsive decision. This was a planned extraction. Surgical and cold. "You're talking about Olivia," Rebecca said, the realization crystallizing with nauseating clarity. The lingering meetings, the changed passwords on shared accounts, the subtle exclusions from key client discussions over the past months, all suddenly making a terrible kind of sense. Daniel didn't deny it. "Olivia understands my vision for Spectrum. She supports my decisions instead of constantly challenging them." "That's my job as your partner and co-founder," Rebecca countered, her voice rising despite her efforts to maintain composure. "To challenge you when you're making decisions that could harm the company. The aggressive rebranding strategy you're pushing will alienate our core clients. You know I'm right about this." A flash of irritation crossed Daniel's face, breaking through his composed facade. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're too cautious, too concerned with client comfort and relationship nurturing when we need to be focused on bold moves and market perception." He picked up his bag, glancing around the room one final time. "I've already spoken with the other investors. We've agreed it's best if you step back from day-to-day operations at Spectrum." The room seemed to tilt around Rebecca. "You've spoken with the investors without me? I'm the co-founder." "With a minority stake after the last funding round," Daniel reminded her. "A decision you were against, if you recall. A decision that gave us the capital to become what we are today." He reached for his car keys on the marble console table by the door. "You'll be compensated fairly, of course. The terms are reasonable." "Reasonable?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Daniel paused in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the hallway light. For a moment, Rebecca thought she saw a flicker of genuine regret cross his face. "You're a brilliant relationship builder, Becca, but marketing requires a certain ruthlessness you've never had." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, with a soft, definitive click, leaving Rebecca standing in the center of their meticulously designed living room, the sound of rain against glass the only response to her unraveling world. She didn't move for hours, standing frozen as if motion might confirm that this new reality was permanent. Outside, the Chicago skyline emerged gradually as the storm cleared, lights twinkling against the night sky. The city looked the same, impossibly unchanged, while everything inside had been destroyed. The home that had been featured in magazines now felt like an elaborate stage set, beautiful but hollow, designed for a life that no longer existed. The walk-in closet Daniel had just partially emptied had been designed with dual sides, his and hers, with a center island of drawers they shared. Now his absence created a physical void that echoed the emotional one tearing through her chest. His cologne lingered in the air, the scent both comforting and nauseating in its familiarity. The night stretched endlessly as Rebecca finally moved from standing to sitting on the edge of their king-sized bed, her body folding in on itself as the magnitude of the loss engulfed her. Not just her relationship, but her company, her professional identity, her life's work, all excised in one clinical conversation. By morning, when the first rays of sunlight broke through the automated blinds programmed by Daniel to rise at precisely 6:30 a.m., Rebecca had not slept. Her eyes, swollen from crying, looked out at the city spread below, a city where somewhere Daniel and Olivia were beginning their new life amid the ruins of hers. The condo, designed to showcase their success, now felt like a mausoleum for her dreams. Every corner held memories of plans made, celebrations shared, a future mapped out in confident detail. The kitchen where they had hosted dinner parties for clients. The dining room where they had signed their first major contract, too excited to wait until they reached the office. The terrace where they had toasted each funding round, each milestone. Rebecca moved through these spaces like a ghost, touching, surfaces, remembering. The pain was physical, a constrictive pressure in her chest, a hollow ache in her stomach, a persistent trembling in her hands that wouldn't subside no matter how tightly she clasped them. When her phone rang at precisely Daniel's name appearing on the screen, Rebecca almost didn't answer, but some remaining professional instinct, some deeply ingrained sense of responsibility to the company they'd built, compelled her to accept the call. "I'm glad you picked up," Daniel said, his voice brisk, already shifted into full business mode. "I've scheduled a meeting with legal at 11 to discuss your transition package. It would be best if you came to the office one last time to sign the paperwork." Rebecca listened, her free hand gripping the kitchen counter so hard her knuckles whitened. Through the phone, she could hear the familiar sounds of Spectrum's headquarters. Gentle conversation, the espresso machine in the break room, phones ringing, life continuing as normal in the company she had helped create. "Becca, are you there?" Daniel's impatience leaked through. "Yes," she managed, the single word an accomplishment against the tightness in her throat. "Good. 11 o'clock then. Olivia will send you the details of what to bring. We'll need your company laptop and access cards." The casual mention of Olivia, now apparently handling the logistics of Rebecca's professional execution, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. The woman who had replaced her in Daniel's bed was now facilitating her removal from the company she had co-founded. "I'll be there," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. After hanging up, she moved to the master bathroom, a sanctuary of marble and glass she had designed herself. The woman in the mirror was unrecognizable, pale, hollow-eyed, diminished. For a moment, Rebecca simply stared at this stranger, this shell of the confident entrepreneur who had graced business magazine covers alongside Daniel as Chicago's most dynamic marketing duo. Then, with hands that trembled slightly less than before, she reached for her makeup bag. If she was to be executed professionally, she would not go without dignity. She would face Daniel, Olivia, and the legal team as Rebecca Mitchell, co-founder of Spectrum Digital Marketing, not as the shattered woman who had stood immobile in her bedroom all night. Layer by layer, she rebuilt her exterior. Foundation, concealer, a subtle contour, a sweep of blush to bring life back to her pallor. The familiar ritual was anchoring, each product a small step toward reclaiming some semblance of control. By the time she selected a crisp white shirt and charcoal pencil skirt from her closet, something had shifted imperceptibly within her. The pain remained raw and overwhelming, but alongside it, something else had begun to take root. Not hope. Not yet, but perhaps its prerequisite. A determination to survive this moment and the next, and the one after that. The condo, with its soaring ceilings and perfect views, had been designed to impress, to announce to the world that Rebecca Mitchell and Daniel Carter had arrived. Now, as Rebecca gathered her car keys and professional portfolio, she recognized it for what it truly was: a beautiful, empty shell that had never been a home. As she stepped through the front door toward her waiting car, Rebecca didn't know yet what would rise from the ashes of this devastation. She couldn't imagine that 4 years later, she would stand at the head of a boardroom table, watching Daniel's face contort with shock as she reclaimed what he had taken. She knew only that she had to survive this day, and she would, with her. Head held high and her wounds carefully concealed behind a mask of professional composure. The Chicago skyline gleamed in the morning sunlight as she drove toward Spectrum headquarters one last time, unaware that this ending was actually the first step in a remarkable beginning. The Spectrum digital marketing headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass building in Chicago's River North district. Rebecca remembered every detail of its design: the heated debates over the floor plan, the careful selection of the building location, even the custom-made reception desk that greeted visitors with its elegant curves of reclaimed wood. As Rebecca stepped off the elevator at precisely 10:45 that morning, she felt like a ghost in her own creation. Employees glanced up as she passed, their expressions shifting quickly from recognition to discomfort before they looked away. News traveled fast in creative agencies, and it was clear from their averted eyes that everyone already knew. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," said Carlos, the security guard who had worked at Spectrum since its early days. His usual warm smile was replaced with a look of awkward sympathy. "It's good to see you," Rebecca nodded, unable to trust her voice. She had known these halls would feel different today, but she hadn't anticipated the acute sense of alienation, of suddenly being an outsider in the very space she had helped design. The receptionist, a recent hire whom Rebecca didn't recognize, looked up with a professionally neutral expression. "Ms. Mitchell, legal is expecting you. 15th floor, conference room B." Not the executive floor, not Daniel's office or the main boardroom. Conference room B, the small, windowless space typically used for vendor meetings and junior staff. Interviews. The message was clear. This was to be as quick and clinical as possible. "Thank you," Rebecca replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt interminable. 2 junior copywriters joined her, their animated conversation about a client presentation dropping into uncomfortable silence when they recognized her. Rebecca kept her eyes fixed on the changing floor numbers, her reflection in the polished elevator doors showing a woman composed and professional, the careful mask betraying none of the turmoil beneath. Conference room B was exactly as she remembered, utilitarian and bland, with generic motivational posters that had been selected by an HR consultant years ago. Waiting inside were Margaret Winters from Legal, a man Rebecca didn't recognize who was clearly an external attorney, and Olivia Taylor. Olivia sat with perfect posture in a dress Rebecca recognized from Spectrum's last holiday party. The irony wasn't lost on her. While Rebecca had been at home hosting clients and their spouses, Olivia had already been more than Daniel's assistant. "Rebecca, thank you for coming in," Margaret began, her professional tone barely concealing her discomfort. "This is Marcus Bennett from Keller & Associates." Rebecca took the seat across from them, placing her portfolio carefully on the table. "Where's Daniel?" "Mr. Carter thought it would be best if he wasn't present for this discussion," Olivia answered smoothly. "He wanted to ensure the transition was handled with appropriate sensitivity." The audacity of his absence, of sending his mistress instead, struck Rebecca with such force that she nearly laughed. This, then, was the final indignity. being processed out of her own company by the woman who had replaced her, while Daniel couldn't even face her. "I see," Rebecca said, the two simple words containing volumes. Marcus Bennett cleared his throat, sliding a thick document across the table. "We've prepared a comprehensive severance package that I believe you'll find quite generous." Rebecca didn't reach for it immediately. "Before we begin, I'd like to understand exactly what the board has been told about my departure." Margaret and Marcus exchanged glances. Olivia's expression remained perfectly controlled. "The official communication states that you're stepping back to pursue other interests," Margaret offered. "Daniel was quite insistent that your contribution to Spectrum be acknowledged appropriately." "How thoughtful of him," Rebecca said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. She finally reached for the document, opening it to scan the first page. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the essence was clear. In exchange for her shares being bought out at a predetermined rate and a substantial severance package, she would relinquish all claims to Spectrum Digital Marketing and sign a comprehensive non-compete agreement. "The non-compete covers all digital marketing services for a period of 3 years, Marcus explained, pointing to the relevant section. 3 years. Daniel wasn't just removing her from Spectrum. He was effectively barring her from working in her field for 3 years. The calculated ruthlessness of it took her breath away. "And if I don't sign?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. Marcus's expression tightened slightly. "Mr. Carter hoped it wouldn't come to that. But should you choose not to? Accept these terms. The company is prepared to proceed with a performance-based termination." "Performance-based?" Rebecca repeated, the words tasting bitter. Olivia leaned forward slightly. "There's documentation of several instances where your cautious approach caused Spectrum to miss key market opportunities. The board has reviewed these cases and supports the assessment." Of course they had. Daniel had been systematically building his case, likely for months. The disagreements that Rebecca had thought were normal strategic debates between co-founders had been carefully documented and presented as failures on her part. Rebecca looked at Olivia directly for the first time, taking in the woman who had been Daniel's executive assistant for the past year. She was younger, certainly, but it wasn't just youth that Daniel had chosen, it was compliance. Where Rebecca challenged, Olivia supported. Where Rebecca urged caution, Olivia encouraged risk. She was everything Rebecca wasn't, and at this moment, that included being on the winning side of this corporate coup. "I'd like a moment to review the document in private," Rebecca said, her voice remarkably steady. "Of course," Margaret replied, looking relieved at the prospect of a brief escape from the tension. "We'll be just outside when you're ready." As the door closed behind them, Rebecca finally allowed her carefully maintained expression to crumble. The conference room that had felt small before now seemed to be closing in around her. She had helped build Spectrum from an idea to a company valued at over $20 million, and now she was being erased. Efficiently, legally, completely. She flipped through the agreement, skimming the sections detailing what she would receive and what she would give up. The financial terms were indeed generous, as Marcus had said. Daniel was buying her silence and her absence at a premium price. A knock at the door startled her. Instead of Margaret or the others, it was Lisa Zhao, Spectrum's director of client services and one of the few executives Rebecca had personally hired years ago. "I heard you were here," Lisa said, closing the door quickly behind her. "I don't have much time." "They've got me in the box signing my execution papers," Rebecca said, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lisa didn't return it. "Listen to me. Don't sign anything yet. Daniel's been planning this for months. He's been systematically discrediting your contributions in board meetings, revising project histories to minimize your role." "I suspected as much," Rebecca replied, a cold clarity beginning to replace the emotional fog she'd been in since last night. "It's worse than you think?" Lisa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's moving Spectrum in a completely new direction. rebranding with a focus on viral campaigns rather than measurable ROI, dropping smaller clients to pursue only high-profile accounts. The conservative approach you've advocated, he's doing the exact opposite. He's gambling everything on flash over substance. Rebecca felt a flicker of vindication. She'd been warning about the dangers of prioritizing perception over performance for months, concerns Daniel had dismissed as overly cautious. "Why are you telling me this?" Rebecca asked. Lisa glanced nervously at the door. "Because it's wrong. What he's doing. Not just to you personally, but to the company." She hesitated. "And because I'm leaving too. I gave my notice this morning. Several of us are." The realization that she wasn't alone in her concerns about Daniel's leadership provided an unexpected spark of strength. If others could see it too, if Lisa, one of their most valuable executives, was walking away, perhaps Rebecca's judgment hadn't been as clouded by emotion as Daniel had claimed. "Thank you," Rebecca said, reaching out to squeeze Lisa's hand. "This means more than you know." "Just be careful," Lisa warned, moving toward the door. "Daniel's not the man we thought he was." She shook her head. "And Olivia? She's ambitious, very ambitious." As Lisa slipped out, Rebecca returned her attention to the agreement before her. The parameters of her challenge were now clear. Daniel had orchestrated not just the end of their relationship, but the systematic dismantling of her professional reputation. He had rewritten their shared history to position himself as the visionary and Rebecca as the liability. And he had selected, in Olivia, someone who would reinforce rather than challenge his worst instincts. The pain of betrayal remained a physical ache beneath her ribs. But alongside it, something else was taking shape. A cold, clear determination. Daniel believed he had won. He believed she would sign these papers, take the money, and disappear into obscurity while he drove their company toward his vision of success. What he didn't understand, what he had always underestimated, was exactly what Rebecca Mitchell was capable of when pushed to her limits. When Margaret, Marcus, and Olivia returned to the conference room, they found Rebecca sitting calmly, the agreement closed before her. "Have you had sufficient time to review the terms?" Marcus asked, retaking his seat. "Yes," Rebecca replied, "and I have a counter-proposal." The surprise on their faces would have been amusing under different circumstances. "A counter-proposal isn't really the purpose of this meeting," Olivia began, her tone condescending. "Nevertheless, I have one," Rebecca continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I'll sign the agreement as written, with one modification to the non-compete clause." Marcus frowned. "The non-compete is a standard. I want it reduced." "To 1 year instead of 3, Rebecca interrupted. 1 year, and I walk away quietly." "Mr. Carter was very specific about the 3-year term," Olivia said, her expression hardening. Rebecca looked directly at her, seeing for the first time not just her replacement but her opponent. "Then Mr. Carter can tell me that himself. I won't negotiate my future with his proxy." The tension in the room shifted palpably. This wasn't proceeding according to the script Daniel had prepared. "I'll need to consult with Mr. Carter," Marcus said, gathering his papers. "You do that," Rebecca replied. "I'll wait." As they filed out, leaving her alone again, Rebecca felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. This small act of resistance, this refusal to simply comply with Daniel's terms, was the first step toward reclaiming her agency. She didn't yet know how she would rebuild from these ashes. She couldn't imagine that in 4 years, she would stand at the head of Nexus Innovation Group's boardroom table, watching Daniel's face contort with shock as she announced his termination. She had no way of knowing that this crushing defeat would eventually lead to her greatest triumph. But in this moment, in this sterile conference room where Daniel had intended to finalize her corporate execution, Rebecca Mitchell made a silent promise to herself. This was not the end of her story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one that Daniel Carter would come to regret provoking with every fiber of his being. 45 minutes later, the door to conference room B opened again. Daniel Carter entered alone, his presence immediately filling the small space with attention that hadn't existed before. He wore the gray Tom Ford suit Rebecca had given him for his last birthday, the irony of which wasn't lost on her. "I understand we have a problem with the terms," he said without preamble, taking the seat across from her. Gone was any pretense of the man she had loved. This was Daniel Carter, CEO of Spectrum Digital Marketing, handling a business complication. "Not a problem," Rebecca replied calmly. "A counteroffer." Daniel studied her, perhaps surprised by her composure. He had likely expected tears, emotional pleas, the overreaction he had always accused her of during their disagreements. "The 3-year non-compete is non-negotiable," he said finally. "The board is adamant about protecting Spectrum's interests." "The board?" Rebecca repeated. "Or you, Daniel?" Something flickered across his face. Irritation, perhaps, at being challenged. "In this case, our interests align perfectly. You know too much about our strategy, our clients, our intellectual property. 3 years gives us adequate protection. It also ensures I can't work in my field until I'm practically obsolete in the digital world," Rebecca observed. "Quite convenient for you." Daniel leaned back, his expression hardening. "This isn't personal, Rebecca. It's business." The words hung in the air between them, so patently false that Rebecca almost laughed. Nothing could be more personal than this. The man who had shared her bed, her dreams, her company, now clinically excising her from all three. "If it were just business," she said carefully, "you would have bought me out months ago when we first disagreed about the rebranding strategy. Instead, you built a case against me, documented our strategic disagreements as my failures, and presented them to the board only after you'd secured their loyalty." Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "Am I?" Rebecca leaned forward. "Tell me something, Daniel. When did it start with Olivia? Before or after you decided I was a liability to Spectrum?" "That's irrelevant to these proceedings," he replied coldly. "Indulge me. It's the least you can do." Daniel checked his watch, a gesture Rebecca recognized from countless meetings when he was growing impatient. "If you must know, Olivia and I recognized our compatibility about a year ago, but that has nothing to do with this business decision." A year. While Rebecca had been working 70-hour weeks helping build Spectrum's client base, Daniel had been pursuing her eventual replacement, professionally and personally. The timeline made the betrayal even more calculated than she had imagined. "I see," she said, her voice steady despite the fresh wave of pain his admission triggered. "Well, since we're being so honest with each other, let me be clear about something. I built this company alongside you. Every client we signed, every campaign we developed, every dollar of funding we secured, I was there. You don't get to rewrite that history just because it's inconvenient for your new narrative." Daniel's expression remained impassive, but Rebecca could see the subtle signs of his growing frustration, the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tap of his index finger against the table. "No one is denying your early contributions," he said, his tone measured. "But companies evolve, Rebecca. What Spectrum needs now isn't what it needed 5 years ago. Your conservative approach was holding us back from necessary growth." "My conservative approach kept us profitable when 3 of our competitors folded during the last recession," Rebecca countered. "My conservative approach is why we have a cash reserve while others operate on venture funding and prayer." Daniel's patience was visibly thinning. "This is exactly why we're here today. You see threats everywhere, Rebecca. I see opportunities. This industry rewards bold moves, not cautious hedging." This industry is littered with the corpses of agencies that made bold moves on borrowed money, Rebecca replied. She reached for the agreement, flipping to the non-compete section. 1 year. That's my offer. 1 year and I sign everything else as is. Daniel studied her for a long moment, calculation evident in his gaze. 2 years. Final offer. Rebecca considered. 2 years was still a significant handicap, but it wasn't the professional death sentence that 3 years would have been in the rapidly evolving digital marketing industry. Fine. 2 years, she agreed. Have legal redraft it, and I'll sign this afternoon. Daniel nodded once, standing to signal the end of their negotiation. He hesitated for a moment, as if there were something more he wanted to say. Whatever it was, he thought better of it. The revised agreement will be ready by 3, he said, moving toward the door. Daniel, Rebecca said, stopping him before he could leave. One more thing. He turned, his hand already on the door handle. You've won. You have the company, the board's support, and Olivia. You have everything you want. Rebecca met his gaze directly. Remember this moment. Something like unease flickered across Daniel's face before he masked it with a businesslike nod. Goodbye, Rebecca. The door closed behind him, and Rebecca was alone again in the sterile conference room. The conversation had transpired exactly as Daniel had planned, except for her small victory on the non-compete clause. He had arrived expecting capitulation, and instead encountered resistance. Minimal, certainly, but it was something. Rebecca gathered her things slowly, in no rush to leave this final act of her time at Spectrum. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see life continuing in the office beyond. Employees at their desks, conversations in the hallway, the mundane rhythm of corporate existence undisturbed by the personal and professional earthquake she had just experienced. As she stepped out of Conference Room B for the last time, Rebecca felt oddly disconnected from her surroundings, as if she were observing the scene from a great distance. The Spectrum offices, once so familiar, now seemed alien, a place where she no longer belonged. She made her way to her office on the executive floor to collect her personal belongings, aware of the eyes following her progress. The corner office that had been hers since Spectrum's earliest days was already being packed up, 2 facilities employees carefully removing her awards and photographs from the walls. Ms. Mitchell, one of them said, looking uncomfortable. We were told to have this cleared by end of day. I'm sorry, we didn't know you'd be coming by. It's fine, Rebecca said, noting that the plants she had carefully tended for years had already been removed. I just need a few personal items. She gathered what remained, a small jade figurine that had been her grandmother's, a fountain pen from her first mentor, a framed photograph of her parents. So little to show for years of her life invested in these walls. Across the floor, through the glass partition that separated their offices, Rebecca could see Daniel in conversation with Olivia. They weren't touching, they were too professional for that in the office. But there was an intimacy to their posture that spoke volumes. They were already planning, already moving forward into the future they had constructed on the ruins of her past. As Rebecca placed her office key and security badge on the desk, her final surrender of the company she had helped build, something shifted within her. The pain was still there, a physical presence beneath her ribs, but it had transformed into something harder, more defined. Not yet determination, not quite resolve, but perhaps their precursor, a silent refusal to let this moment define the rest of her life. The elevator ride to the lobby was silent, the small box of personal items in her arms pathetically inadequate to represent what she had lost. In the reflective doors, Rebecca caught a glimpse of herself, still composed, still dignified, still standing despite everything that had been taken from her. Outside, Chicago's notoriously fickle weather had shifted, the morning's clear skies replaced by gathering storm clouds that matched her internal landscape. As Rebecca placed her box in the passenger seat of her car, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour that obscured the Spectrum building behind sheets of water. She sat motionless behind the wheel, watching as employees hurried in and out of the building's revolving doors, umbrellas unfurling against the deluge. Somewhere in that building, Daniel and Olivia were continuing their day, perhaps already discussing who would take over Rebecca's responsibilities, how they would distribute her projects. The thought should have devastated her anew, but instead, something unexpected happened. As rain pounded against the car roof, creating a cocoon of white noise around her, Rebecca felt a moment of perfect clarity break through the emotional chaos of the past 24 hours. Daniel had taken her relationship. He had taken her company. He had taken her professional reputation, but he couldn't take her knowledge, her experience, her capabilities. Those remained firmly, irrevocably hers. The realization wasn't comfort exactly. The wounds were too fresh, too deep for anything approaching solace. But it was a foothold, a small, solid place to stand in the midst of the destruction. Rebecca started the car, the familiar hum of the engine grounding her in the present moment. She had nowhere particular to go. The condo she had shared with Daniel no longer felt like home, and her office was no longer hers. She was, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, completely untethered. The sensation was terrifying. It was also, she realized with surprise, oddly freeing. As she pulled away from Spectrum Digital Marketing for what she believed was the last time, Rebecca had no way of knowing what the next 4 years would bring. She couldn't imagine the company she would build, the strategies she would develop, the path that would eventually lead her back to confront Daniel not as an ousted co-founder, but as his superior. All she knew in that moment was that the story Daniel had written for her, the narrative of the cautious, emotional partner who couldn't keep pace with his vision, was not the story she would accept. If she had to start again from nothing, she would. If she had to reinvent herself entirely, she would do that too. The rain continued to fall as Rebecca drove away from her past and toward an unwritten future. Behind the wheel of her car, in the privacy of this transitional space between what had been and what would be, Rebecca Mitchell made a decision that would alter the course of her life, and though she didn't know it yet, Daniel's as well. She would not disappear. She would not fade into obscurity. She would not become the cautionary tale of the woman left behind by a visionary ex-partner. Instead, she would become something Daniel had never anticipated, never prepared for: a worthy opponent. The thought wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was something more fundamental, a refusal to accept the ending Daniel had scripted for her, a decision to write her own story, whatever it might be. As Rebecca navigated through Chicago's rain-slicked streets, she had no destination in mind. But for the first time since Daniel had walked out of their bedroom with his packed weekender bag, she had something almost as important: a direction. The days immediately following Rebecca's departure from Spectrum passed in a blur of practical necessities. She signed the revised separation agreement with its 2-year non-compete clause without further negotiation. She put the Lincoln Park condo on the market, unable to bear the echoing emptiness of spaces once filled with shared ambitions. She moved into a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park, a neighborhood she had always loved, but Daniel had deemed too bohemian for their professional image. These actions were performed with mechanical efficiency, her emotional responses temporarily suspended as she focused on the logistics of dismantling her former life. Friends and family expressed concern about her composed demeanor, expecting tears or rage that never materialized. What they couldn't see was that beneath this calm exterior, Rebecca was meticulously analyzing her situation with the same strategic thinking she had once applied to Spectrum's marketing challenges. 1 month after signing the separation agreement, on a crisp autumn morning, Rebecca sat at her new small kitchen table with a blank notebook before her. The page was headed with a single question: What now? The non-compete agreement prevented her from working directly in digital marketing for enterprise clients, the field she had dedicated her career to thus far. Daniel had effectively blocked her most obvious path forward, but as Rebecca stared at the blank page, she recognized that this restriction, while significant, was also narrowly defined. She couldn't create marketing campaigns for clients for 2 years. She couldn't work for Spectrum's competitors. But there were no restrictions on consulting, on education, on investment activities, or on developing expertise in adjacent industries. The realization sparked the first genuine smile she had experienced since Daniel's departure. He had tried to build a cage but had left multiple doors unlocked. By evening, her blank page had transformed into a complex mind map detailing potential. Paths forward. 3 main branches emerged from her central question: knowledge development, gaining expertise in areas complementary to but not directly competing with her existing skill set; network building, cultivating relationships with key players in the marketing industry who might become allies in her future endeavors; and financial positioning, strategically investing her severance package to build resources for whatever came next. Over the following weeks, these 3 branches became Rebecca's roadmap. She enrolled in an intensive data analytics program at the University of Chicago, focusing specifically on predictive modeling and marketing analytics, technical skills that would complement her strategic expertise. She joined 3 industry organizations focused on women in business leadership, carefully selecting those that Daniel had always dismissed as unnecessary networking. Most significantly, she reached out to Lisa Zhao, who had left Spectrum shortly after Rebecca's departure. "I'm not asking you to betray any confidences," Rebecca assured Lisa over coffee at a quiet cafe far from Spectrum's offices. "I just want to understand what's happening in the industry from someone whose judgment I trust." Lisa studied Rebecca carefully before responding. "Daniel is doing exactly what you warned against. Spectrum has rebranded completely, dropped half their long-term clients to chase flashier accounts, and the emphasis is entirely on viral campaigns with minimal measurement of actual business impact. The industry press is calling him visionary. The seasoned clients are more skeptical." "And Olivia?" Rebecca asked, surprising herself with how steady her voice remained when speaking her replacement's name. "Promoted to Chief Marketing Officer," Lisa replied. "She's smart. I'll give her that, but she's also completely aligned with Daniel's high-risk approach. There's no counterbalance anymore." This information became the foundation for Rebecca's next moves. If Daniel was restructuring Spectrum around flash rather than substance, he was creating vulnerability that might eventually be exploited. The thought wasn't yet a plan, merely an observation filed away for future reference. 6 months into her transformation journey, Rebecca made her first public appearance at Chicago's annual Women in Business Leadership Summit. She had been invited to participate in a panel discussion on resilience and reinvention, topics she now had intimate experience with. The moderator introduced her as Spectrum Digital's co-founder, a description that once would have pained her, but now felt like ancient history. When asked about her current projects, Rebecca smiled with genuine enthusiasm. "I'm in a unique position of being able to step back and evaluate the marketing industry from a new perspective," she explained. "After years of focusing exclusively on campaign development and client acquisition, I'm now exploring the data infrastructure that should drive marketing decisions. It's been illuminating." The response was measured, revealing nothing of her longer-term intentions while establishing her as someone evolving rather than diminished by recent changes. After the panel, Rebecca found herself surrounded by women eager to connect: CEOs of smaller marketing firms, data scientists specializing in consumer behavior, financial analysts focused on the marketing sector. One conversation proved particularly significant. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a respected business professor and venture capitalist, handed Rebecca her card with a directness that cut through the usual networking pleasantries. "When you decide what you're building next, call me," Eleanor said. "I've followed your work for years. Daniel Carter may be the face people recognize, but industry insiders know who really built Spectrum's strategic foundation." Rebecca accepted the card, tucking it carefully into her portfolio. "I'm under a non-compete for another 18 months. Eleanor's smile was knowing. Non-competes restrict what you can build, not what you can learn, who you can meet, or how you can prepare. Time spent in strategic preparation is never wasted. That conversation marked a turning point in Rebecca's journey. Until then, she had been focused primarily on recovery and rebuilding her individual skills. Eleanor's interest sparked something more ambitious, the first glimmer of a plan that extended beyond personal reinvention to something that might eventually intersect with Daniel's future. Over the next year, Rebecca methodically expanded her knowledge and network. She completed 3 specialized data science courses focused on marketing analytics, consumer behavior prediction, and digital attribution modeling. She consulted for venture capital firms evaluating potential investments in marketing technology, providing technical expertise that helped them avoid costly missteps. Most importantly, she began tracking Spectrum's activities with careful attention to patterns that others might miss. Each press release announcing a new client or campaign was followed by Rebecca's detailed analysis of the likely resource allocation, revenue structure, and long-term sustainability. She built comprehensive models projecting Spectrum's probable financial health based on publicly available information. She noted which executives remained from her era and which had been replaced by Daniel loyalists. This wasn't obsession or vengeance. It was strategic intelligence gathering performed with the detached precision that had always characterized Rebecca's approach to business challenges. 18 months after leaving Spectrum, Rebecca registered a new entity, Horizon Ventures. The name was a subtle nod to her past, the horizon line visible from the Spectrum offices she had helped design, but pointed firmly toward the future. Horizon's mission statement was carefully crafted, integrating data science and marketing strategy to create measurable business growth. Vague enough to cover multiple activities, specific enough to attract the right partners. With her severance, package as initial capital and Eleanor Hayes' firm as a significant investor, Rebecca began assembling a team of data scientists and marketing strategists who shared her vision. "We're not building just another marketing agency," she explained to her small but growing team during their first strategy session. "We're building a new model altogether, one where creative decisions are driven by data insights, not subjective opinions." What Rebecca didn't share, even with her closest advisors, was the specific opportunity she had begun to see taking shape on the horizon. Nexus Innovation Group, the marketing technology conglomerate that represented the pinnacle of industry success, was showing early signs of stagnation. 2 consecutive quarterly reports had shown them just barely meeting earnings expectations. Industry analysts had started questioning the sustainability of their traditional agency model in an increasingly data-driven landscape. These weren't yet critical problems. Nexus remained profitable and prestigious, but they were hairline cracks in the foundation that only someone with Rebecca's particular expertise would recognize as potentially serious. 22 months after signing the separation agreement, with the non-compete restriction just weeks from expiring, Rebecca received an unexpected call from James Porter, one of Nexus's board members whom she had met during her networking activities. "This is probably crossing a line," James began without preamble. "But I think you should know that Spectrum Digital is making an aggressive play to acquire one of Nexus's subsidiary agencies." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "That's interesting." "Timing," she replied carefully. "May I ask why you're telling me this?" James was silent for a moment before answering. "Because Spectrum doesn't have the financial foundation for the acquisition they're proposing. Their numbers look impressive on the surface, but anyone who digs deeper would find concerning patterns. Nexus might be making a serious mistake if they proceed." After ending the call, Rebecca stood at her apartment window, looking out at the Chicago skyline where Spectrum's offices were visible among the downtown towers. The information James had shared wasn't just industry gossip, it was a potential inflection point that aligned perfectly with the capabilities she had spent nearly 2 years developing. If Daniel pushed forward with an overambitious acquisition despite Spectrum's underlying financial weaknesses, he would be creating exactly the kind of vulnerability that could be exploited. That vulnerability would create opportunity for those prepared to act. Rebecca reached for her phone, scrolling to Eleanor Hayes' contact. "Eleanor, it's time to discuss Phase 2. Are you available for dinner tonight?" As she ended the call, Rebecca felt a calm certainty settle over her. The past 22 months had transformed her from Spectrum's discarded co-founder into the head of a specialized marketing analytics firm with growing resources and strategic connections throughout the industry. She had rebuilt herself professionally while developing expertise specifically designed to recognize and capitalize on exactly the situation that now appeared to be developing. Daniel had removed her from the company they had built together, believing he was eliminating an obstacle to his ambitions. In doing so, he had inadvertently created something much more dangerous: a highly motivated observer with intimate knowledge of Spectrum's inner workings and no loyalty to his leadership. The non-compete agreement that was meant to sideline Rebecca had instead given her the gift of time. Time to study, to plan, to build new alliances, and to position herself precisely where she needed to be when opportunity emerged. As Rebecca prepared for her dinner with Eleanor, selecting a sharp black suit that symbolized this new chapter, she reflected on how completely her journey had transformed her. The devastated woman who had sat paralyzed in her car outside Spectrum headquarters nearly 2 years ago had evolved into someone new. Someone with clearer vision, colder calculation, and absolute confidence in her ability to recognize and seize the right moment when it came. That moment, she now believed, was rapidly approaching, and when it arrived, Daniel Carter would discover just how thoroughly he had underestimated the woman he had discarded. Exactly 2 years and 1 day after signing the separation agreement with Spectrum, Rebecca Mitchell sat in the pristine conference room of Horizon Ventures, surrounded by her carefully assembled team of data scientists, industry experts, and legal advisors. The wall-to-wall windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, with both Spectrum and Nexus headquarters clearly visible in the distance, visual reminders of her past and potential future. As of today, we are free to pursue any opportunity in the digital marketing space, including potential actions involving Spectrum Digital, Rebecca began, her voice steady as she addressed the room. But that's not where our focus should be. Eleanor Hayes, who had become Rebecca's closest advisor and Horizon's principal investor, leaned forward. "You're thinking bigger." "Much bigger," Rebecca confirmed, pressing a button that changed the display on the large screen at the front of the room. Nexus Innovation Group. Financial charts appeared, displaying Nexus's stock performance and key operational metrics. "Our analysis suggests that Nexus will need to make a significant strategic pivot within the next 6 months to maintain market position," explained Rajiv Mehta, Horizon's lead data scientist. "Their traditional agency model is showing decreased effectiveness in 4 key performance indicators, and their technology integration platform hasn't been substantially updated in 18 months. True, Rebecca nodded. Meanwhile, they're facing pressure from 3 directions: pure technology companies moving into the marketing space, consulting firms adding creative capabilities, and specialized agencies like Spectrum trying to poach their key clients. Spectrum doesn't have the financial stability to be a serious threat, Eleanor observed. Daniel doesn't know that, Rebecca replied. His latest SEC filing shows aggressive growth projections based more on hope than reality. He's positioning for an acquisition attempt that would stretch Spectrum beyond its financial breaking point. For 2 hours, the team methodically reviewed their intelligence on Nexus's vulnerable position. The company was not yet in crisis. It remained profitable and maintained strong brand recognition. But its leadership was relying on outmoded business models while competitors innovated around them. "What are you proposing?" Eleanor asked, when the analysis concluded. Rebecca switched the display to a new slide. A strategic investment followed by a staged acquisition. Horizon offers what Nexus most desperately needs: cutting-edge data science applied to marketing problems. We approach them not as competitors, but as innovative partners with complementary expertise. The plan Rebecca outlined was ambitious but meticulously structured, beginning with a strategic partnership that would give Horizon visibility into Nexus's operations, followed by a minority investment, and ultimately positioning for a controlling interest when Nexus inevitably faced its next quarterly disappointment. "This isn't about quick profits," Rebecca emphasized. "It's about patience and positioning. We become indispensable first, then owners." As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, Eleanor remained behind, studying Rebecca with the shrewd assessment that had made her one of Chicago's most successful venture capitalists. "We've prepared for this opportunity for nearly 2 years," Eleanor observed. "You've built Horizon specifically to position yourself for this acquisition. But I need to ask the question everyone's thinking, but no one dares to voice. Is this about sound business strategy or personal vindication?" Rebecca met her gaze directly. "Both," she answered with uncharacteristic candor. "I won't pretend. There isn't personal satisfaction in the prospect of acquiring Nexus when Daniel is desperately trying to seem important enough for them to notice him. But that wouldn't be enough to justify the financial risk we're contemplating." She stood, moving to the window to look out at Nexus's headquarters. "The acquisition is strategically sound for all the reasons outlined in our analysis. Nexus has valuable assets and market position but outdated methodology. We have cutting-edge methodology but need their scale and client base. Together, we create something more valuable than either company alone." Eleanor joined her at the window, seemingly satisfied with Rebecca's response. "Then let's make the next move." The following weeks saw Horizon Ventures executing a carefully orchestrated strategy. Rebecca initiated discreet conversations with key Nexus board members and institutional investors, positioning Horizon as a potential strategic partner rather than a threat. The approach was precise. Not a hostile takeover attempt, but a methodical positioning as a solution to the growing concerns about Nexus's direction under current leadership. 3 months after initiating contact, Rebecca received the pivotal call she had anticipated. James Porter's name appeared on her phone screen, his timing as predictable as she had anticipated. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow," James said without preamble. "Our quarterly numbers are worse than projected, and the AWI-type Spectrum acquisition attempt exposed some concerning gaps in our technology infrastructure that Daniel Carter's team was shockingly quick to identify." "That's unfortunate timing," Rebecca replied, carefully neutral in her response. "Unfortunate doesn't begin to cover it," James continued. "Several board members mentioned your name and Horizon Ventures today. They've seen the demos of your marketing analytics platform and wondered if there might be broader potential for collaboration." Rebecca allowed a moment of silence before responding. "What exactly are you asking, James?" "Would Horizon consider a strategic partnership with Nexus, potentially including a significant investment combined with leadership consultation?" The question was direct, exactly what Rebecca had been positioning for over the past months. "We might," she replied, maintaining her professional composure despite the surge of vindication she felt. "I'd need to review the current finances and operations, the complete picture, not just what's presented to analysts. And any discussion would need to include exploration of executive leadership vision alignment, not just financial terms." "The board meets at 9 a.m. tomorrow," James said. "Could you present a preliminary framework by then?" "I'll see you at 9, Rebecca confirmed, ending the call with a steady hand despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. For the next 12 hours, Rebecca and her team worked without pause, preparing a comprehensive proposal for Nexus Innovation Group. The presentation was meticulously crafted to appeal to the board's urgent needs while establishing terms that would give Horizon significant influence over Nexus's strategic direction. At precisely 8:45 the following morning, Rebecca walked through the revolving doors of Nexus's headquarters for the first time. The imposing lobby with its marble floors and wall of digital displays showcasing the company's award-winning campaigns would have been intimidating 2 years earlier. Now, Rebecca saw it merely as excessive overhead with questionable ROI, exactly the kind of impression-focused spending she would recalibrate once she had influence. The boardroom looked exactly as she had seen in photographs. The long mahogany table, the views of Lake Michigan, the subtle displays of corporate success on the walls. 8 board members were already seated when she entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and poorly concealed desperation. James Porter rose to greet her. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Rebecca. The board is eager to hear Horizon's perspective on potential collaboration with Nexus." Rebecca took the offered seat, placing her presentation materials on the table. "Before we begin, I want to be clear about my understanding of Nexus's current position. Based on public information and our analysis, you're facing declining effectiveness in traditional agency services, technology integration challenges, and increasing competition from specialized firms. Is that accurate?" The directness of her approach created momentary discomfort, but Victor Reynolds, the board chair, nodded. "Uncomfortably accurate. We've been operating on assumptions that the market no longer supports." For the next hour, Rebecca outlined Horizon's analysis of Nexus's challenges and their proposed solution, a strategic partnership that would integrate Horizon's data science capabilities into Nexus's service model, followed by a phased investment approach that would ultimately lead to full integration of the companies. "Our due diligence confirms that Nexus's brand equity and client relationships remain strong," Rebecca explained, her command of the company's situation clearly impressing the board. "The current challenges stem from methodology and technology gaps, not fundamental market position failures." The board members asked pointed questions about timelines, integration strategies, and leadership transitions, all of which Rebecca addressed with composed expertise. As the discussion progressed, she could feel the energy in the room shifting. The initial wariness was being replaced by cautious optimism as board members recognized that Horizon's proposal represented a lifeline they desperately needed. "There's one aspect we haven't discussed explicitly," Victor said as the presentation concluded. "Leadership. Your proposal references executive restructuring, but doesn't specify who would lead the integrated companies." The moment Rebecca had prepared for had arrived. She closed her portfolio deliberately before responding. Horizon's investment would be contingent on installation of new leadership with proven experience in data-driven marketing and a clear vision for integrating traditional creative services with advanced analytics. Given those requirements, I would step in as CEO during the integration period. The statement hung in the air, its implications fully registering with each board member. Rebecca watched as expressions shifted from surprise to calculation to gradual acceptance. For some, like James Porter, there was even visible relief. "You built Horizon from nothing in just 2 years," James observed. "Your team's analytics capabilities surpass anything we've developed internally. If anyone can successfully integrate these companies, it's you. And that's precisely why I'm uniquely qualified to lead this transition," Rebecca confirmed, her confidence absolute. Victor exchanged glances with several other board members before addressing Rebecca again. "We'll need to deliberate on Horizon's proposal, but speaking personally, I find the terms reasonable given our situation. How quickly could you move forward if the board approves?" "Horizon is prepared to execute immediately," Rebecca replied. "Our legal team has draft agreements ready, and the capital is secured. We could announce the strategic partnership as early as next week, with the investment and leadership transition following after standard due diligence. The speed of her response clearly impressed the board, reinforcing the image of Horizon as a decisive, prepared partner rather than an opportunistic acquirer. "There is one other matter," Rebecca added, her tone remaining professional despite the personal satisfaction she felt at what would come next. "We're aware that Spectrum Digital has been in discussions regarding acquisition of your Weber Communications subsidiary. Any agreement between Horizon and Nexus would require immediate suspension of those discussions pending comprehensive review. The first direct reference to Spectrum and, by extension, to Daniel, delivered as a non-negotiable business condition rather than personal vendetta." Victor nodded slowly. "Those discussions have raised concerns among several board members already. Your condition aligns with our developing perspective." As the meeting concluded, Rebecca was asked to wait in an adjacent conference room while the board deliberated. Through the glass walls, she could see their animated discussion, the occasional glance in her direction, the gradual nodding of heads as consensus formed. Exactly 51 minutes later, Victor entered the conference room where Rebecca waited. "The board has voted unanimously to accept Horizon's partnership proposal, subject to final legal review of the terms. We're prepared to move forward with the leadership transition on the timeline you proposed." Rebecca stood, extending her hand to the board chair. "Nexus has a strong foundation and valuable market position, with proper strategic direction and methodology modernization. I'm confident we can transform the company's trajectory. There is one detail you should be aware of," Victor added with slight hesitation. "Daniel Carter has been aggressively pursuing our Weber subsidiary. He's scheduled to be in our offices next week for what he believes is a progress update on the acquisition. Given your history, would you prefer that we handle that conversation before you assume your position?" Rebecca considered the option briefly before shaking her head. "No, that won't be necessary. As Nexus's incoming CEO, handling complex transitions will be part of my responsibility. I'll speak with Mr. Carter personally." As Victor left to inform the rest of the board of their decision, Rebecca remained alone in the conference room, the magnitude of what had just transpired washing over her. 2 years of meticulous planning, strategic positioning, and patient waiting had culminated in this moment of complete reversal. Daniel had forced her out of Spectrum, believing he was eliminating an obstacle to his ambitions. Now she would return not just to professional prominence, but to a position far beyond what either of them had achieved at Spectrum, leading a company that Daniel had desperately tried to become important enough to acquire even a small part of. The symmetry was so perfect it almost seemed scripted, yet Rebecca knew it was the result not of fate, but of careful calculation. Her ability to recognize Daniel's fundamental weaknesses and position herself precisely where she needed to be, when those weaknesses inevitably created vulnerability. She looked out at the Chicago skyline from the conference room windows. Rebecca felt neither triumph nor revenge, but a calm certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Nexus would become her company in all the ways that truly mattered, and Daniel Carter was about to discover just how profound a miscalculation he had made in underestimating her capabilities. The following week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Legal teams from both companies finalized the partnership agreement. Rebecca met with Nexus's executive leadership to begin transition planning. Press releases were drafted announcing the strategic partnership, with Rebecca's appointment as CEO scheduled to be announced after a brief due diligence period. On the day of Daniel's scheduled meeting, exactly 1 week after the board had approved Horizon's proposal, Rebecca arrived at Nexus headquarters early, reviewing the Weber Communications documents that Daniel believed he was on track to acquire. The subsidiary was profitable but not particularly strategic to Nexus's future, which was precisely why the board had entertained Daniel's acquisition overtures, despite concerns about Spectrum's financial stability. At precisely 2 p.m., Rebecca, positioned herself in a small conference room adjacent to the main meeting room where Daniel was scheduled to meet with James Porter and several other executives. Through the glass walls, she could observe without being immediately visible, giving the Nexus team time to deliver the initial news before she joined the conversation. Daniel arrived at 2:15, his characteristic 15 minutes late, a power move he had always employed to remind others of his perceived importance. From her vantage point, Rebecca could see him clearly. The same confident stride, the same perfectly tailored suit, the same practiced smile as he greeted the Nexus executives. Even from a distance, Rebecca could pinpoint the exact moment when Daniel realized something was wrong. His posture stiffened, the smile froze and then disappeared. His gesturing hand dropped to his side. James was speaking, his expression grave. The other executives watching Daniel's reaction with careful neutrality. Daniel suddenly stood, his movement so abrupt that his chair rolled backward. He was speaking rapidly, his gestures becoming more animated as James continued to deliver what was clearly unwelcome news. Though Rebecca couldn't hear the words, the body language told the story clearly. Denial, anger, attempted negotiation, all cycling through in quick succession. James glanced toward the conference room where Rebecca waited, the prearranged signal indicating it was time for her to join them. With a deep breath, she gathered her materials and walked the short distance to the meeting room, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. When she pushed open the door, Daniel's back was to her. He was still arguing with James, his voice raised enough that Rebecca caught the end of his statement. Completely unacceptable. The acquisition discussions have been proceeding for months. You can't possibly— The board's decision is unanimous, Daniel, James interrupted firmly. Nexus is pursuing a different strategic direction, and the person leading that direction isn't an outsider to our industry. At that moment, Daniel sensed the presence behind him and turned. The sequence of emotions that crossed his face in the next 3 seconds was something Rebecca would remember for the rest of her life. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally a dawning horror as understanding settled in. "Hello, Daniel," Rebecca said calmly, moving to the table and placing her portfolio on its polished surface. "It's been a while." Daniel stared at her as if she were an apparition. "What is this?" he demanded, looking from Rebecca to James, and back again. "What is she doing here?" "Ms. Mitchell is CEO of Horizon Ventures," James explained with professional detachment. "As I was explaining, the board has accepted Horizon's strategic partnership proposal, which includes leadership, integration effective immediately." The color drained from Daniel's face as the full implications registered. "This is a joke," he said, though his expression suggested he already knew it wasn't. Horizon Ventures has secured $85 million in committed capital for the first phase of integration with Nexus. Rebecca interjected, her voice steady. "Our due diligence on both Nexus and the proposed spectrum acquisition of Weber Communications has been thorough, including comprehensive analysis of Spectrum's financial position." A muscle twitched in Daniel's jaw, a tell Rebecca recognized, from their past, a sign of fury barely contained. "You've been planning this," he said, the accusation barely above a whisper. "All this time, you've been waiting for an opportunity to identify a strategic acquisition that aligns with Horizon's capabilities and growth objectives?" "Yes," Rebecca maintained her professional tone, despite the personal satisfaction coursing through her. "The non-compete agreement you insisted upon expired last week. Horizon's proposal was presented to the Nexus board on Monday. The timing is indeed fortuitous." Daniel turned to James, attempting one last appeal. "This is a personal vendetta, not a business strategy. Surely the board can see that." "What?" "The board sees," James cut in firmly, "is a company offering exactly the data-driven approach Nexus needs, led by someone with proven success in building marketing organizations. Ms. Mitchell's history with the industry is an asset in this situation, not a liability." Daniel's gaze swept the room, searching for allies and finding none. The Nexus executives who had entertained his acquisition proposal now sat in uncomfortable silence. Their loyalties shifted to the company's future rather than his ambitions. The terms of the Weber Communications discussions are no longer relevant, Rebecca said, sliding a document across the table toward him. The board has approved a complete strategic reevaluation of all potential acquisitions and partnerships. Daniel didn't reach for the document. Instead, he focused entirely on Rebecca, his initial shock now hardening into cold fury. "You won't be able to run this company," he said, echoing almost verbatim the words he had spoken when ending their partnership. "You don't have the vision or the risk tolerance." The parallel wasn't lost on Rebecca. For a moment, she was transported, back to that devastating night in their condo, Daniel packing his bag while dismissing her professional capabilities. The symmetry of this moment, the complete reversal of their positions, was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. "That's not for you to determine anymore," Rebecca replied calmly. "The decision has been made. We'll be issuing a press release tomorrow morning announcing Horizon's strategic partnership with Nexus and the beginning of leadership integration." The mention of a public announcement seemed to finally break through Daniel's disbelief. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him with visible impact. "You can't do this," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "The market will be informed of the strategic partnership before trading opens tomorrow," James interjected. "Given Nexus's recent performance challenges and Horizon's impressive analytics capabilities, we anticipate a positive response." Daniel's phone buzzed, drawing his attention momentarily. His expression shifted as he read the message. "Olivia says someone from Nexus just called to cancel our technical integration meeting scheduled for Friday," he said, looking up with renewed anger. "What is this, Rebecca? A purge of any connection to me?" "Not at all," Rebecca replied. "Ms. Taylor has valuable skills. Should Spectrum wish to explore other partnership opportunities with Nexus in the future, those conversations can be revisited after our strategic realignment is complete." The deliberate echo of how Daniel had handled Rebecca's removal from Spectrum was subtle but unmistakable. Future conversations were theoretically possible, but practically unlikely. A professional dismissal without being an outright rejection. Daniel's laugh was bitter. "So that's what this is. Revenge served cold. Is that it, Rebecca?" Rebecca met his gaze directly. "This isn't about revenge, Daniel. It's about building something substantive rather than chasing perception. It's about creating genuine value through data-driven decision-making rather than subjective creative direction. Nexus is worth transforming, even if your acquisition ambitions aren't." The boardroom fell silent as the former partners regarded each other across the polished table. For Rebecca, the moment carried none of the vindictive satisfaction she might once have anticipated. Instead, she felt a calm certainty that this outcome was both just and necessary, not merely for her personal redemption, but for the future of both companies. "We should conclude this meeting," James finally said, breaking the tense silence. "Daniel, we appreciate your interest in Weber Communications, but as explained, those discussions are now on hold indefinitely." Daniel's gaze remained locked on Rebecca. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Actually, it is," Rebecca replied with finality. "Your meeting is concluded, and mine with the Nexus executive team is about to begin. Goodbye, Daniel." As Daniel gathered his materials, his movements were stiff, mechanical. A man operating on autopilot as his reality reconstructed itself around him. Rebecca watched as he walked toward the door, his tall frame suddenly seeming diminished, his confident stride replaced by halting steps. The parallels to her own departure from Spectrum 2 years earlier were striking. The stunned disbelief, the professional humiliation, the sudden reversal of fortune. When Daniel had disappeared from view, James turned to Rebecca. "That was intense," he observed, "but handled well." "Thank you," Rebecca replied, already refocusing on the tasks ahead. "We should meet with the executive team immediately. They'll need reassurance and clear direction before tomorrow's announcement." As they prepared to address Nexus's leadership team, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Hayes. "Partnership agreement signed. Funding secured. Congratulations, CEO Mitchell." The simple text marked the official completion of Rebecca's transformation from discarded co-founder to triumphant CEO. In just 2 years, she had rebuilt herself professionally, created a successful company, and positioned herself perfectly to achieve something far greater than what she and Daniel had built together. As Rebecca Mitchell stepped into the Nexus boardroom to address her new executive team, she carried with her not just the lessons of the past, but a clear vision for the future, one that would transform Nexus from a traditional marketing conglomerate into a data-driven industry leader. Daniel Carter had once dismissed her as lacking the necessary ruthlessness for success. In proving him catastrophically wrong, she had simultaneously validated an approach to business that prioritized substance over appearance, measurable results over subjective perception, and strategic patience over impulsive action. The woman who had sobbed in her car after being expelled from Spectrum 2 years ago now stood as CEO of a larger, more significant company, not because she had sought revenge, but because she had recognized opportunity and positioned herself to seize it. The strategy that Daniel had rejected as too cautious, too measured, too focused on long-term results rather than immediate impressions, had proven not just valid, but vastly superior to his approach. As Rebecca began outlining her vision for Nexus's transformation to the assembled executives, she felt no need to mention Daniel or their shared history. His role in her story, once so central, so defining, had been reduced to a footnote, a catalyst for a journey that had taken her far beyond anything they could have built together. The future beckoned, and Rebecca Mitchell stepped confidently toward it, her path illuminated not by vindication or revenge, but by the clear, unwavering light of her own hard-won wisdom and the knowledge that success, when built on solid foundations, speaks for itself. 1 year to the day after Rebecca Mitchell assumed leadership of Nexus Innovation Group, she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, watching the Chicago sunset paint the skyline in hues of gold and amber. The symmetry of the anniversary wasn't lost on her. One complete cycle from ousted co-founder to triumphant CEO, from personal devastation to professional vindication. The quarterly financial report sat on her desk, its numbers telling a story more eloquent than any victory speech. Client retention had increased by 24%. Employee satisfaction scores had reached their highest point in 5 years. The stock price had risen 78% since her appointment was announced. Most tellingly, Nexus had been named Agency of the Year by Adweek, with specific praise for its innovative integration of data analytics and creative strategy, the very approach Daniel had once dismissed as unnecessary. A gentle knock interrupted her reflection. Jason Kim, her newly appointed Chief Strategy Officer, entered with a tablet displaying the latest social media metrics from their most recent campaign launch. "Another record-breaking engagement rate," he said, handing her the tablet. "The data-driven, creative approach is resonating exactly as you predicted." Rebecca nodded, studying the numbers. "And the client feedback?" "Overwhelmingly positive. 3 competitors' clients have requested meetings next week." After Jason departed, Rebecca returned to her window view. In the distance, she could see the smaller building that housed Spectrum Digital Marketing, Daniel's company that had once seemed so important, but now appeared diminished both literally and figuratively in comparison to Nexus's towering headquarters. In a development that had provided unexpected closure, Daniel had approached her 6 months earlier, requesting a meeting. After his acquisition attempt had collapsed, Spectrum had faced mounting financial challenges. The high-risk strategy Rebecca had always cautioned against had finally produced its inevitable result. Impressive short-term growth followed by unsustainable overhead and client churn. Their meeting had been brief, but significant. Daniel had proposed selling Spectrum to Nexus, an ironic reversal he acknowledged with uncharacteristic self-awareness. "You were right," he had said, the admission clearly difficult. "About the sustainable growth model, about the importance of data-driven decisions, about a lot of things." Rebecca had declined the acquisition offer but approved a smaller deal. Nexus would purchase Spectrum's client contracts and proprietary campaign analytics, allowing Daniel to gracefully exit a company that was no longer viable. As part of the agreement, Olivia had been offered a mid-level position at Nexus's Austin office, which she had reluctantly accepted rather than face unemployment. The deal had been completed 3 months ago. Daniel had left Chicago for Los Angeles, accepting a creative director position at a small agency, a significant step down from CEO, but a role better suited to his talents. Olivia was performing adequately in Austin, though without Daniel's protection. Her actual capabilities were proving considerably less impressive than her previous title had suggested. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Hayes. "Board meeting prep in 15, new acquisition targets to discuss." The reminder pulled Rebecca firmly back to the present and the future she was building. She gathered her materials for the upcoming meeting, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The pain of Daniel's betrayal, once so all-consuming, had faded to a distant memory, relevant only for the lessons it had taught her. In its place stood something far more valuable. A leadership philosophy validated not by revenge, but by measurable results. The data-driven approach she had always advocated had transformed Nexus from a stagnating traditional agency into an industry pioneer. What gave Rebecca the deepest satisfaction wasn't watching Daniel and Olivia navigate diminished roles in her organization. It was knowing that her vision had been right all along. The balanced approach combining creative strength with analytical rigor, the preference for substance over appearance, the commitment to measurable outcomes rather than subjective impressions, these principles had built something far more significant than her previous partnership with Daniel could have achieved. As Rebecca left her office for the boardroom, she passed the collaborative workspace where teams of data scientists and creative directors worked side by side, a physical manifestation of the integrated approach she had championed. An approach Daniel had once called unnecessarily complicated was now the cornerstone of Nexus's success. 4 years ago, Rebecca had sat devastated in her car outside Spectrum's offices, unable to imagine a future beyond the ruins of her personal and professional life. Today, she walked confidently toward a boardroom where she would outline Nexus's expansion strategy for the coming year. The transformation was complete. Not because Daniel and Olivia now worked under her authority. That was merely a symbolic footnote to a much larger story. The true triumph was that Rebecca Mitchell had built something authentic and valuable on her own terms. She had transformed betrayal not into revenge, but into wisdom, setback into strategy, and ultimately, personal pain into professional purpose. In doing so, she had written a far better story than the one Daniel had attempted to erase her from, a story entirely her own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.